So now I'm going to show you how to braid a shape that looks a lot like a fish, and the first thing we want to do is make sure we have a couple pieces of string available. We're going to use that to hold our fish together while it dries. And I'll set those aside. I've rolled 5 yellow strips and 5 blue strips, so perhaps this is a Swedish fish. And the hardest thing to do here is getting all these strips between my 2 fingers so I can slip them into the clamp. This tends to be quite wide. This is a little challenging, but I arrange the strips. I'm braiding in pairs, and I arrange them in alternating colors, just like this. And one thing to consider is I'm going to be sticking these in my clamp, and the distance that I go into the clamp is going to be the length of the tail of my fish. So I'm setting these up so that I'm not holding them way out here. I'm holding them back in here so that I can get them into my clamp without a problem. And you can see how many. There's 10 strips here, so it's very wide. It's hard to hold them all in place. One final strip, and now I've got to get them in my clamp. Almost better. That's pretty good. So the tail of my fish is going to extend from the edge to this point. That's the length of my tail. And the next step is to begin braiding. And I'm braiding in pairs. So I separate 4 on one side and 6 on the other. And I just bring those pairs across into the middle, just as you watched in the braiding chapter, learning to braid. Just like this. Just like that. So now I've finished braiding my fish, and I need to tie off these loose strips. So I slip a piece of string behind it. Tie like that. And I try to tie a bow so I can reuse this piece of string again, so I won't have to cut it. I tie a nice little bow like that. And now I release from the clamp, and I'm going to narrow the back of the fish here a little bit, and I'm going to tie that as well. String. Whoops. You can see we've got this nice fish shape going. It can be a bit of a challenge to tie string when you're wearing gloves, but it can be done. And now I'm going to try and tie a bow here as well. Just like that. And now I want to shape this fish a little bit. I want to make it wider in the body, and you can shape your fish any way you want. But all I'm doing is I'm pushing my fingers together here to make the body of the fish wider. And I want to narrow the area that leads to the tail, like that. It looks pretty good to me. I want a wide body and narrow when it goes to the tail, and then the tail I just separate the individual strands, just like this. And this doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to cut this in a straight line in a later step. So this looks okay to me. And so I'm going to let that cure just like that. So here's my yellow and blue fish, and it's now cured. So I can take these little strings off, just like that, and the tail. This. And the last step here, or The next step is to trim. I want to trim the front edge here so it looks a little more fish-like. I trim in line with the braid, just like that. And I do the same thing on the other side, in line with the braid, excuse me. Just like that. So we get this sort of snub-nosed shape. And the other thing I like to do, I don't like to have my braid sloping forward, sloping towards the front of the fish. I like it sloping away from the fish so it has more of a streamlined look. And if we just flip it, now you can see these braids are sloping towards the back of the fish rather than towards the front. So it just looks a little more streamlined, a little more realistic. And just like that. And that's how you make a fish.